In 1900, the richest gold deposit in human history simply vanished. Not stolen by bandits, not lost in a bank collapse, not seized by conquering armies. $2 billion worth of gold bars, coins and raw ore, enough to fill several railroad cars, disappeared from the South African Republic as British forces closed in during the Second Boer War. President Paul Kruger, the man who controlled this treasure, took the secret of its location to his grave in 1904. For over 120 years, treasure hunters have combed through mountains, rivers and abandoned mine shafts across South Africa, searching for what historians call the greatest lost treasure in modern history. The Kruger Millions represent more than just missing gold. They symbolize the wealth of an entire nation that chose to hide its riches rather than surrender them to colonial powers. Conservative estimates place the treasure's modern value at over $2 billion, making it worth more than many countries' entire gold reserves. Satellite surveys, ground-penetrating radar, and sophisticated metal detection equipment have all failed to locate deposits that could fund a small nation's budget for years. This is the story of how the world's richest gold reserve became the world's greatest treasure mystery, and why after more than a century of searching, the Kruger Millions remain lost somewhere in the South African wilderness. The South African Republic that Paul Kruger governed from 1883 to 1900 represented something unprecedented in African history. A nation built entirely on gold wealth that had accumulated faster than any society could reasonably manage. The discovery of the Witwatersrand goldfields in 1886 had transformed a modest farming republic into the world's largest gold producer virtually overnight. By 1890, the Transvaal region was generating more gold than California, Australia, and the Klondike combined, creating wealth on a scale that few nations in history had ever experienced. Paul Kruger himself embodied the contradictions of this sudden prosperity. Born in 1825 to Voortrekker farmers who had migrated from the Cape Colony to escape British rule, he represented traditional Afrikaner values of independence, conservative Christianity, and agricultural self-sufficiency. Yet by the 1890s, he presided over a modern mining economy that attracted international investment, sophisticated technology, and immigrant workers from across Europe and Asia. This tension between traditional farming culture and industrial mining wealth would ultimately shape the Republic's decision to hide its treasure rather than surrender it to colonial authority. The gold that would become the Kruger Millions accumulated through a combination of mining royalties, taxes on gold exports, and direct government ownership of profitable mining operations. Unlike other gold-producing regions where private companies controlled extraction and export, the South African Republic maintained significant governmental involvement in mining activities. Kruger's administration collected substantial revenues from every ounce of gold extracted from Transvaal soil, creating a national treasury that grew dramatically throughout the 1890s. The international context surrounding the South African Republic made Kruger's gold accumulation both a source of strength and a target for imperial ambitions. British interest in Southern African gold had intensified throughout the 1890s as the empire sought to maintain its global economic dominance in the face of rising competition from Germany and the United States. The discovery that a small Boer republic controlled the world's richest goldfields created strategic concerns that extended far beyond simple commercial interests. Cecil Rhodes, the British mining magnate and politician who controlled substantial interests in South African diamond and gold mining, had spent years attempting to incorporate the Transvaal into British-controlled territory. His failed Jameson raid in 1895 represented an unsuccessful attempt to overthrow Kruger's government through armed intervention disguised as an uprising by British miners and settlers. This event convinced Kruger that eventual military conflict with Britain was inevitable and began his thinking about protecting the Republic's accumulated wealth. The administrative structure that managed the South African Republic's gold wealth operated through a combination of traditional government departments and specialized mining bureaus. The state mining engineer supervised technical aspects of government-owned operations, while the Treasury Department managed revenues and currency issues. Foreign financial advisors, primarily from Germany and the Netherlands, provided expertise in international banking and monetary policy that helped maximize the Republic's returns from gold exports. By 1899, the South African Republic's gold reserves had reached levels that rivaled those of major European powers. Conservative estimates suggest that the government controlled between 200 and 400 tons of refined gold, plus substantial quantities of raw ore awaiting processing. Additional wealth included gold coins from various international mints, precious gemstones from diamond mining operations, and foreign currency reserves accumulated through international trade. The logistics of managing such enormous gold reserves presented challenges that few governments had previously faced. Storage facilities had to accommodate physical security requirements while allowing for regular access during normal government operations. Transportation systems needed to move gold safely between mining sites, processing facilities, and storage locations across hundreds of miles of rugged terrain. Record-keeping systems had to track quantities, locations, and ownership details for wealth that exceeded the gross domestic product of most contemporary nations. International banking relationships that the South African Republic had developed during the 1890s provided both opportunities and vulnerabilities as tensions with Britain escalated. European banks that had financed mining development and handled gold exports suddenly found themselves in politically sensitive positions as war became increasingly likely. Some financial institutions began quietly reducing their exposure to South African operations, while others attempted to maintain profitable relationships despite diplomatic pressure from British authorities. The cultural and religious beliefs that shaped Afrikaner society influenced attitudes toward the accumulated gold wealth in ways that would ultimately affect decisions about its preservation. Calvinist religious traditions emphasized stewardship and responsibility for community resources, while historical experiences of British persecution reinforced determination to maintain independence at any cost. These values created strong motivation for protecting the Republic's wealth from foreign seizure, even if that protection required extreme measures. Military preparations that began in earnest during 1899 included contingency planning for protecting the Republic's financial assets in case of armed conflict. Kruger and his advisors understood that gold represented both the foundation of their nation's strength and its most attractive target for conquest. Strategic thinking about asset protection became an essential component of overall defense planning as diplomatic relations with Britain continued deteriorating. The question that would ultimately define the Kruger Millions mystery was whether such enormous wealth could be successfully hidden in an era before modern banking, electronic transfers, or sophisticated storage technology. The answer would depend on the ingenuity, determination, and secrecy of a small group of men who faced the challenge of making billions of dollars worth of gold simply disappear before enemy forces could seize it. Let me take you back to 1899, when the richest nation in Africa began preparing for a war that would determine whether their treasure would fund independence or colonial conquest. Chapter 1. Gold Republic. The Witwatersrand goldfields that transformed Paul Kruger's republic into the world's wealthiest mining region represented a geological anomaly that had taken millions of years to form and mere decades to revolutionize. The gold-bearing reefs that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the South African highveld contained ore concentrations that exceeded anything previously discovered in human history. Conservative estimates suggest that the Transvaal region held approximately 40% of all gold ever mined by humanity, wealth that fate had placed under the control of a small farming republic that had barely existed for 50 years. Kruger's personal relationship with this sudden wealth reflected the complex transformation that gold discovery had forced upon traditional Afrikaner society. As a young man, he had participated in the Great Trek, the migration of Boer farmers away from British rule in the Cape Colony during the 1830s and 1840s. His worldview had been shaped by decades of subsistence farming, cattle ranching, and small-scale agriculture that required minimal interaction with global markets or international finance. The discovery of gold in 1886 thrust him into the center of international economic relationships that few world leaders fully understood. The administrative challenges of managing unprecedented gold wealth required innovations in government structure and financial management that stretched the capabilities of the Republic's limited bureaucracy. Kruger's administration had to develop systems for collecting mining royalties, regulating extraction operations, managing currency policy, and conducting international trade relationships with minimal previous experience in such complex economic activities. The government improvised solutions that combined traditional Boer governmental practices with imported expertise from European financial advisors. Mining operations that generated the Republic's gold wealth operated through a combination of large-scale industrial enterprises and smaller prospecting operations that reflected the geological diversity of the Witwatersrand region. Deep-level mines that extracted ore from reefs hundreds of feet underground required sophisticated machinery, engineering expertise, and large labor forces that transformed the social and economic structure of the entire region. Surface operations that processed gold-bearing gravel and rock created additional employment and wealth generation that rippled throughout the local economy. The international investment that flowed into Transvaal goldfields during the 1890s created relationships and dependencies that would ultimately influence the Republic's fate during the approaching war. British, German, American, and French mining companies established operations that employed thousands of workers and generated millions of dollars in annual production. These foreign investments created economic ties that complicated diplomatic relationships and provided additional motivation for imperial powers to maintain influence over the region's mineral wealth. Kruger's taxation policies regarding gold mining represented a delicate balance between maximizing government revenues and encouraging continued investment in mining development. The Republic collected royalties based on gold production values, license fees for mining rights, and various export taxes that captured a substantial portion of the wealth being extracted from national territory. These revenues provided the financial foundation for government operations while creating the surplus wealth that would eventually become the Kruger Millions. The labor systems that supported gold mining operations reflected the racial and social hierarchies that characterized late 19th century South African society. White miners, primarily immigrants from Britain, Australia, and other English-speaking countries, occupied skilled and supervisory positions that commanded high wages. African workers, recruited from across southern Africa through organized labor migration systems, performed the dangerous underground work that actually extracted gold ore from the reefs. These labor relationships created social tensions that would influence political developments and military preparations. Currency and monetary policy in the South African Republic evolved to accommodate the massive influx of gold wealth while maintaining economic stability and international credibility. The Republic issued its own currency, backed by gold reserves that provided more solid foundation than most contemporary monetary systems. International exchange relationships allowed Transvaal currency to circulate in global markets, while enabling the government to accumulate foreign exchange reserves through gold exports. The technological infrastructure that supported gold mining operations required investments in transportation, communication, and industrial facilities that modernized the entire region. Railroad construction connected mining areas to coastal ports, enabling efficient export of gold and import of mining equipment and supplies. Telegraph systems provided communication networks that linked mining operations to government offices and international markets. Electric power generation and water supply systems supported the industrial activities that gold extraction required. International diplomatic relationships that developed around gold mining interests created both opportunities and vulnerabilities for the South African Republic as tensions with Britain escalated. European powers that had invested in Transvaal mining operations maintained diplomatic missions that provided channels for political and economic communication. These relationships offered potential support for independence, while creating additional pressure points that imperial powers could exploit. The storage and security systems that the Republic developed for managing accumulated gold wealth reflected both the enormous quantities involved and the growing recognition that this treasure might face threats from external enemies. Government vaults in Pretoria contained substantial quantities of refined gold bars and coins, while additional storage facilities at mining sites held raw ore and partially processed materials. Security arrangements included both human guards and physical barriers, designed to protect wealth that represented the foundation of national independence. Financial record-keeping systems that tracked the Republic's gold assets operated through a combination of traditional bookkeeping methods and imported European accounting practices. Government ledgers recorded production figures, tax collections, storage locations, and distribution patterns that provided detailed documentation of wealth accumulation. These records would later become crucial evidence for treasure hunters attempting to calculate the total value and possible locations of the missing Kruger millions. The cultural impact of sudden gold wealth on traditional Afrikaner society created social changes that influenced political attitudes and military preparations. Farming communities that had previously operated through subsistence agriculture and barter systems found themselves connected to global markets and international finance. Traditional religious and social values adapted to accommodate material prosperity, while maintaining core beliefs about independence, community responsibility, and resistance to foreign domination. By 1899, the South African Republic had accumulated gold reserves that exceeded those of most major powers, while maintaining the political independence that made this wealth vulnerable to imperial conquest. The challenge facing Kruger and his advisors was whether they could protect their nation's treasure from the military forces that were gathering to seize it, and whether the gold that had made them rich would ultimately become the prize that destroyed their independence. Chapter 2. War Clouds. The diplomatic crisis that erupted between the South African Republic and Britain during 1899 centered explicitly on control over the Transvaal's gold wealth, though both sides disguised their economic motivations behind arguments about political rights and imperial security. British Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain had spent years demanding voting rights for British miners and settlers in the Transvaal, but internal government documents reveal that the real objective was gaining control over gold mining operations that had become essential to British imperial finance and global economic dominance. Paul Kruger's response to escalating British pressure reflected his understanding that the dispute transcended simple questions of political representation or mining rights. The British Empire's demand for control over Transvaal goldfields represented an existential threat to Boer independence that could not be resolved through diplomatic compromise or constitutional reform. His private correspondence from this period reveals growing conviction that war was inevitable, and that the Republic's accumulated wealth would become a primary target for conquest forces. The intelligence networks that both sides developed during the pre-war period provided detailed information about military preparations, economic vulnerabilities, and strategic planning that influenced decisions about asset protection and wealth preservation. British agents operating in the Transvaal reported extensively on gold mining operations, government finances, and storage facilities that contained the Republic's accumulated treasure. Boer intelligence services gathered information about British military preparations and strategic objectives that confirmed fears about imperial intentions regarding the goldfields. International diplomatic efforts to prevent war founded partly on the enormous economic stakes involved in controlling the world's richest gold-producing region. European powers that had significant mining investments in the Transvaal found themselves caught between their economic interests and their diplomatic relationships with Britain. Germany, which had particularly substantial financial exposure in Transvaal mining operations, attempted to mediate between British imperial demands and Boer independence claims. But these efforts collapsed as military preparations accelerated. The economic intelligence that Kruger gathered about British financial conditions reinforced his determination to protect the Republic's gold reserves from imperial seizure. Reports from European banking contacts revealed that Britain's imperial finances were increasingly strained by military commitments around the world, and that control over Transvaal gold had become essential for maintaining the empire's global economic position. This information convinced Kruger that surrendering control over the goldfields would effectively mean surrendering the Republic's independence permanently. Military preparations that began in earnest during mid-1899 included specific contingency planning for protecting the government's accumulated gold reserves in case diplomatic solutions failed. Kruger and his military advisors understood that the Republic's conventional military forces could not permanently resist British imperial armies, but they believed that protecting the nation's wealth might enable continued resistance or eventual negotiated independence. These strategic calculations led to secret planning for asset concealment that would begin months before actual hostilities commenced. The logistics of protecting billions of dollars worth of gold presented unprecedented challenges that required innovative solutions and absolute secrecy. Unlike currency or securities that could be transferred through international banking systems, physical gold required transportation, storage, and security arrangements that were vulnerable to discovery by enemy intelligence services. The Republic's advisors began developing plans that would disperse the treasure across multiple hidden locations while maintaining sufficient security to prevent theft or accidental discovery. International banking relationships that had supported the Republic's gold trade became increasingly complicated as war appeared inevitable. European banks that had financed mining development and handled gold exports faced difficult decisions about maintaining business relationships that might become politically untenable if hostilities began. Some institutions began quietly reducing their exposure to Transvaal operations, while others explored ways to continue profitable relationships despite diplomatic pressure from British authorities. The transportation infrastructure that had been developed to support gold mining operations provided both opportunities and vulnerabilities for implementing asset protection plans. Railroad lines that connected mining areas to government storage facilities could facilitate rapid movement of gold to hidden locations, but these same transportation networks would become primary targets for British military forces. Alternative transportation methods that relied on ox wagons and pack animals offered greater security but limited capacity for moving the enormous quantities involved. Intelligence preparations for implementing gold concealment plans required identifying trustworthy individuals who could participate in the operation without revealing its existence to British agents or opportunistic treasure seekers. Kruger's inner circle included mining engineers, transportation specialists, and trusted political allies who had demonstrated both competence and absolute loyalty during previous crises. The success of any concealment operation would depend on maintaining security among this small group of participants who would know the treasure's ultimate location. The timing considerations that influenced asset protection planning reflected the complex relationship between diplomatic negotiations, military preparations, and practical logistics required for moving massive quantities of gold. Kruger's advisors needed to begin concealment operations early enough to ensure completion before hostilities began, but late enough to avoid unnecessary exposure to discovery or theft. This timing challenge became increasingly difficult as British military preparations accelerated and diplomatic solutions appeared less likely. Foreign diplomatic communications that Kruger received from European allies provided crucial intelligence about British strategic planning and likely military objectives during any future conflict. German and Dutch diplomatic sources confirmed that British military planning explicitly included seizure of gold mining facilities and government treasure reserves as primary objectives. This intelligence reinforced the urgency of asset protection planning and influenced decisions about concealment methods and locations. The domestic political considerations that influenced gold concealment planning reflected the complex social and economic relationships that had developed around mining wealth in Afrikaner society. Some Republic citizens who had profited from gold mining opposed risking the treasure in extended resistance to British forces, preferring negotiated settlement that might preserve some degree of economic autonomy. Other political factions argued that the gold represented the foundation of national independence and should be protected at any cost. Financial record-keeping related to concealment planning required balancing the need for documentation that would enable eventual treasure recovery against security requirements that demanded minimal written evidence of the operation. Kruger's advisors developed coded recording systems that would allow authorized individuals to locate hidden assets while providing no useful information to enemy intelligence services or unauthorized treasure seekers. As diplomatic relations deteriorated throughout the summer of 1899, Kruger faced the final decision about whether to implement the gold concealment plans that his advisors had spent months developing. The choice involved not just military and political calculations, but fundamental questions about the relationship between material wealth and national independence that would define the Republic's legacy for future generations. Chapter 3. Secret Exodus. September 1899 marked the beginning of the most audacious treasure concealment operation in modern history, as Paul Kruger's inner circle began implementing plans to hide the South African Republic's entire gold reserve before British forces could seize it. The operation commenced under cover of routine government business and normal mining activities, disguising movements of enormous wealth as standard administrative procedures that would not attract attention from British intelligence agents or local informants. The first phase of the concealment operation focused on consolidating gold reserves from multiple government storage facilities into a central staging area where the treasure could be organized for transportation to its ultimate hiding place. Government vaults in Pretoria contained the largest concentration of refined gold bars and coins, while additional deposits at various mining sites held raw ore and partially processed materials. Moving these assets to a single location required careful coordination and absolute secrecy to avoid revealing the operation's scope. Kruger's personal involvement in overseeing the gold consolidation reflected both his determination to protect the Republic's wealth and his recognition that the operation's success depended on maintaining security at the highest levels of government. Contemporary accounts describe him personally inspecting gold shipments and reviewing transportation arrangements, ensuring that every aspect of the concealment process met his requirements for security and effectiveness. His direct participation also enabled rapid decision-making when unexpected complications arose. The transportation methods selected for moving the consolidated gold reserves reflected careful analysis of security requirements, capacity limitations, and the need to avoid detection by British surveillance networks. Large-scale railroad transportation offered speed and capacity, but created obvious targets for enemy interdiction. Ox-wagon convoys provided greater security and flexibility, but limited the quantity of gold that could be moved in a single operation. The final plan combined both methods to maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure to discovery or theft. Mining engineers who participated in the concealment operation brought technical expertise that proved crucial for selecting appropriate storage locations and implementing effective concealment methods. Their knowledge of geological conditions, underground excavation techniques, and mineral extraction equipment enabled the creation of hidden storage facilities that could protect enormous quantities of gold indefinitely. These engineering skills also ensured that concealment sites could be accurately marked and eventually relocated when conditions allowed treasure recovery. The selection criteria for choosing ultimate concealment locations involved balancing security requirements against practical considerations about access, geological stability, and long-term preservation. Ideal sites needed to be remote enough to avoid accidental discovery while remaining accessible to authorized recovery teams using available transportation methods. Geological conditions had to support large-scale excavation and provide protection against water damage, structural collapse, or environmental degradation that might threaten the stored treasure. Security arrangements for the concealment operation required unprecedented coordination between government officials, military personnel, and civilian specialists who each controlled essential aspects of the treasure movement. Armed escorts provided protection against bandit attacks or opportunistic theft during transportation phases. Intelligence operatives monitored British surveillance activities and provided early warning about potential threats to the operation. Communication specialists maintained contact between different teams while avoiding radio or telegraph transmissions that enemy agents might intercept. The documentation systems that recorded concealment locations and procedures reflected the fundamental tension between the need for accurate records that would enable eventual recovery and security requirements that demanded minimal written evidence of the operation's existence. Kruger's advisors developed coded mapping systems and cryptographic references that would allow authorized individuals to locate hidden treasure while providing no useful information to enemy forces or unauthorized treasure hunters. International diplomatic considerations influenced the timing and methods of the concealment operation, as Kruger attempted to maintain normal governmental appearances while secretly protecting the Republic's accumulated wealth. Foreign diplomatic observers and mining company representatives continued their normal activities in Pretoria, requiring the concealment teams to operate with complete discretion to avoid revealing their activities to potential British intelligence sources. The physical logistics of moving hundreds of tons of gold across difficult terrain presented engineering challenges that required innovative solutions and specialized equipment. Heavy gold bars and containers needed transportation systems capable of handling enormous weight loads over distances that might exceed hundreds of miles. Road conditions that were adequate for normal traffic proved inadequate for the heavy wagons and equipment required for treasure transportation, necessitating route modifications and infrastructure improvements that had to be completed without attracting attention. Weather conditions during the concealment operation created both opportunities and complications for the teams responsible for implementing Kruger's asset protection plans. The seasonal timing of the operation coincided with spring weather patterns that provided favorable conditions for overland travel, but also increased the likelihood of encountering other travelers who might observe and report unusual activity. Balancing speed requirements against security needs became increasingly difficult as the operation progressed. The psychological pressure experienced by operation participants reflected their understanding that they were handling wealth that could determine the future of their nation while operating under conditions that offered minimal margin for error. Participants faced the constant tension between the enormous responsibility they carried and the absolute secrecy required to protect the operation from discovery. These pressures contributed to the extreme loyalty and discretion that characterized the concealment operation's participants for the remainder of their lives. Local population interactions with the concealment operation teams required careful management to prevent inadvertent disclosure of the treasure movement while maintaining normal community relationships. Teams operating in rural areas depended on local cooperation for supplies, accommodation, and transportation support, but providing such assistance without explaining the operation's true purpose created ongoing security risks. The success of community engagement often determined whether concealment sites would remain secret or become subject to local treasure hunting activities. The final phases of the concealment operation involved implementing multiple layers of security and misdirection designed to prevent discovery of the treasure's ultimate location, even if some aspects of the operation were compromised. Decoy operations created false trails and misleading evidence that would confuse enemy investigators or opportunistic treasure seekers. Multiple concealment sites distributed the total treasure across different locations to ensure that discovery of one cache would not compromise the entire reserve. As British military forces began their advance toward Pretoria in early October 1899, Kruger's concealment operation faced its ultimate test of whether months of careful planning and dangerous implementation had successfully protected the Republic's accumulated wealth from imperial seizure. The success or failure of this massive undertaking would determine whether the South African Republic's gold reserves would fund continued resistance or become the prize that rewarded conquest. Chapter 4. Hidden Fortune. The final concealment of the Kruger Millions in remote locations across the South African wilderness represented one of the most sophisticated treasure-hiding operations ever attempted, involving multiple burial sites, complex security measures, and elaborate documentation systems designed to enable eventual recovery while preventing unauthorized discovery. Contemporary estimates suggest that the total treasure was divided among at least 6 different locations, each containing gold worth hundreds of millions of dollars in today's currency. The primary concealment site, according to fragmentary evidence that emerged years later, was located in a mountainous region approximately 200 miles northeast of Pretoria, where natural caves and abandoned mining excavations provided secure storage possibilities. Geological surveys from the early 20th century describe underground formations in this area that could accommodate large quantities of material while offering protection against water damage and structural deterioration. The remoteness of the location ensured minimal risk of accidental discovery, while remaining accessible to recovery teams using available transportation methods. Mining engineers who supervised the treasure concealment brought sophisticated technical expertise that ensured proper storage conditions and accurate location documentation for eventual recovery operations. Their knowledge of excavation techniques, structural support systems, and underground storage requirements enabled the creation of concealment sites that could preserve gold indefinitely while remaining virtually impossible to detect through surface observation. These engineering skills proved crucial for implementing concealment methods that could withstand decades of environmental exposure and geological changes. The security systems implemented at concealment sites included multiple layers of protection designed to prevent discovery, theft, or accidental disturbance of the hidden treasure. Physical barriers such as sealed entrances, camouflaged openings, and natural obstacles provided initial protection against unauthorized access. Warning systems that relied on local environmental features created additional security by making concealment sites appear dangerous or inaccessible to casual observers. Armed guards may have provided temporary security during the concealment process, though no reliable evidence confirms long-term human security arrangements. Documentation methods used to record concealment locations reflected sophisticated understanding of cartography, cryptography, and information security that enabled accurate location marking while preventing unauthorized discovery of the treasure sites. Maps and written records used coded references that were meaningful only to authorized individuals who possessed the necessary decryption keys. Multiple copies of crucial location information were distributed among trusted participants to ensure that the death or capture of individual operation members would not compromise the ability to recover the treasure. The treasure division strategy that split the total gold reserve among multiple concealment sites reflected careful analysis of security risks, transportation limitations, and recovery requirements that influenced operational planning. Distributing the treasure reduced the risk that discovery of a single site would compromise the entire reserve, while enabling more flexible recovery options when conditions allowed. Each site contained sufficient gold to fund significant military or political operations, ensuring that partial recovery would provide meaningful resources for continued resistance. International banking arrangements that had been established before the concealment operation provided potential mechanisms for legitimating recovered treasure and converting gold into usable currency when political conditions allowed. European banking contacts who had maintained relationships with the South African Republic could potentially facilitate gold sales and currency exchanges that would enable recovered treasure to support government operations or individual compensation. These banking relationships became increasingly important as the war progressed and normal financial channels were disrupted. The timing calculations that influenced concealment site selection included considerations about seasonal weather patterns, agricultural cycles, and local population movements that might affect the security of hidden treasure locations. Sites were chosen to minimize the likelihood of discovery during periods when farming, hunting, or other local activities might bring civilian populations into proximity with concealment areas. These timing factors also influenced the scheduling of potential recovery operations that would need to account for seasonal accessibility and security conditions. Environmental protection measures implemented at concealment sites reflected understanding of geological conditions, climate patterns, and natural processes that could threaten the long-term preservation of stored gold. Waterproofing systems protected treasure against moisture damage that could degrade containers or documents. Structural support arrangements prevented cave-ins or collapses that might make recovery impossible or extremely dangerous. Ventilation considerations ensured that underground storage areas would remain accessible for future recovery teams. The psychological impact on operation participants who witnessed the concealment of such enormous wealth created lasting effects that influenced their subsequent behavior and willingness to discuss their experiences. Many participants developed intense feelings of responsibility for protecting the treasure's location, while simultaneously experiencing anxiety about their ability to remember crucial details after years of secrecy. These psychological pressures contributed to the extreme discretion that characterized most participants' behavior for the remainder of their lives. Alternative concealment sites that were prepared but possibly not used provided additional security options and created confusion for later treasure hunters, who attempted to identify the actual locations of hidden gold. Decoy sites with evidence of excavation or storage activity served to mislead enemy investigators and opportunistic treasure seekers, who might discover traces of the concealment operation. These misdirection efforts proved remarkably successful at creating false leads that continue to confuse treasure hunters more than a century later. The local environmental impact of concealment operations included landscape modifications, vegetation removal, and geological disturbances that created subtle evidence of human activity that trained observers might detect years or decades later. However, the participants took considerable care to minimize and disguise such evidence through restoration efforts and natural camouflage techniques that would allow concealment sites to blend seamlessly into surrounding terrain. The success of these efforts explains why conventional archaeological and geological surveys have failed to identify obvious treasure locations. Communication systems that enabled coordination between different concealment teams included coded messages, predetermined meeting points, and signal arrangements that maintained operational security while ensuring effective collaboration. These communication protocols had to function across vast distances and challenging terrain while avoiding interception by British intelligence services that were monitoring government communications. The complexity of maintaining secure communication contributed to the operational challenges that made the concealment operation extraordinarily difficult to execute successfully. As the final concealment operations concluded in November 1899, the participants faced the sobering realization that they had successfully hidden wealth that could determine their nation's future, but they had also created a mystery that might prove unsolvable if the war prevented timely recovery efforts. The success of their concealment work would depend not only on maintaining absolute secrecy, but also on surviving the coming conflict with sufficient knowledge and resources to enable eventual treasure recovery. Chapter 5. Treasure Hunters. The search for the Kruger Millions began almost immediately after the Second Boer War ended in 1902, when rumors about the hidden treasure spread through South African mining communities and attracted the attention of prospectors, adventurers, and international treasure hunting organizations. The first systematic searches were conducted by former government officials and military personnel who had indirect knowledge of the concealment operation, but even these insider efforts failed to locate any significant gold deposits, despite years of intensive investigation. British colonial authorities who controlled South Africa after 1902 launched official investigations into the missing treasure, recognizing that recovery of the Kruger Millions could provide substantial resources for colonial development and imperial finances. Military engineers conducted geological surveys and excavation operations in areas where intelligence reports suggested possible concealment sites. These official efforts employed sophisticated equipment and extensive manpower, but produced no confirmed discoveries despite several years of intensive searching. The first major private treasure hunting expedition was organized in 1905 by a consortium of British and German investors who pooled resources to conduct systematic searches across the Transvaal region. This expedition employed mining engineers, geological experts, and local guides who claimed knowledge of the concealment operation's participants or locations. The expedition spent over 2 years exploring potential sites, but ultimately disbanded after exhausting their funding without making any significant discoveries. European treasure hunting organizations that became interested in the Kruger Millions during the early 20th century brought sophisticated archaeological techniques and advanced detection equipment to their search efforts. French and German expeditions employed ground-penetrating techniques that were advanced for their era. while British groups used metal detection equipment developed for military applications. These technological approaches represented significant improvements over simple excavation methods, but still failed to locate the hidden treasure. Local African communities, who had observed unusual activity during the concealment period, became important sources of information for treasure hunters, though their accounts often proved contradictory or incomplete. Some community members reported seeing large wagon convoys moving through remote areas during 1899, while others described mysterious excavation activities in locations that later searches failed to confirm. These oral history accounts provided valuable leads, but also generated numerous false trails that consumed expedition resources without producing results. The psychological profile of successful treasure hunters who pursued the Kruger Millions reflected a combination of technical expertise, financial resources, and obsessive determination that enabled sustained search efforts despite repeated failures. Many searchers became convinced that they had solved crucial aspects of the mystery and required only additional time or resources to complete successful recovery operations. This psychological investment